Chapter 8, Part 3. So now we're into the Etruscans, which is an area just north of Rome, including Rome, the city of Rome. And this is pre-Roman era, meaning this is part of Italy. It hadn't quite become the Roman Empire yet. This is 520 BC, toward the year zero, roughly. I don't want to get too bogged down with history because we have that in Chapter 7, the video that I uploaded, but this is before the Romans. So the Etruscans are aware of the Egyptians, so you kind of see a few similar stylistic concerns, but this is very different. Some of the major differences here are the equal size of the figures. The female and male counterparts were equally important. So you don't see that hierarchical scale with the Etruscans, for one thing. They're smiling, they're happy, they're uh, imitating, or how do you want to say, they're sculpted in a way that they're relaxing, reclining, and perhaps eating, as opposed to the more official looking Egyptian sculptures where they are heads of state. So they buried their dead in earthen mounds, and they also had a necropolis. Now, in their necropolis, it was more like multiple multiple sarcophagus type pieces like this in one place. It wasn't about rulers. It wasn't a grand monument, if that makes sense. It's about the pleasures of living, and they're here enjoying a banquet. So in Roman times and before Roman, in the area of Italy, people were eating. They would lay down pretty much to eat. They're just reclining, kind of like we do today when we watch television. Okay, so Etruscans, they did bury their dead under row after row in earthen mounds along streets in a necropolis. So this is an underground tomb, and it had several rooms. And then there's there's paintings on the wall. These are frescoes, and this would be banqueters and musicians, right? Similar time frame. Okay, so they're partying, they're having fun, they enjoy life, and we know that. We think about the Italians with their food and their joy of life and that kind of thing. So that's still true of that culture today, but predominantly at that time period, we're expressing joy of life, even in the afterlife. Slightly different but similar. Well, this is kind of a compare contrast here. We're going all the way over to China, thousands of miles away to the east, 259 BC, so we're about 200 years later. This is a huge tomb complex, and this is for a ruler, okay? So originally what was happening, and this is true of Egypt as well, when a ruler died, they would kill all of the servants, the actual people, and the horses and the livestock and everything, and bury it with the ruler. Well, that became difficult for a number of reasons, one of which the loyalty of those servants and their sticking around was difficult. That much killing is difficult. And then also they might disappear toward the end of the reign if they felt like the emperor was going to die. So in China, as well as we looked at Egypt, they had miniature figures of the servants buried with the in the tomb of the pharaohs, but we didn't really look at images of that. Here we have this massive tomb, and these are clay models, right? So we have all of the army, and you see some of the horses back here, right here in this row. But the entire army, the servants would be buried with this emperor, but in this case, it's a stand-in for the actual person, right? So these are soldiers with different parts, like you can see how the head's removed right here. Let's look at a close-up. This one, you can see these were all sort of manufactured. Even 2,000 years ago, the Chinese were manufacturing clay objects. So they had multiple headdresses, multiple torsos, because there's different types of soldiers, different ranks, and so on. So they would have all these different molds, and they would pour the liquid clay into it or press the clay into it. And then the faces would have a mold, and then they would do some sculpting for individuality sake. Okay, so it's a lot of detail, a lot of work, a lot of time-consuming skill, and this was discovered kind of by accident in China, and now the Chinese are kind of on the hunt for these places where these tombs are. Okay, so we're going to go all the way to South America. We're going to go to Peru. Moche culture is a civilization that existed in Peru about 1,700 years ago. It lasted for quite a long time, and they're still finding these burial sites. One was found about 15 years ago when I was in grad school. It's really interesting because we got the guy that was in National Geographic to come and lecture to our class because I studied this culture. So it's still stuff that is being found in Peru, and it's a desert. It's like a deserty. Peru has like a deserty, sandy beach sort of thing that's bigger than our beaches, and that has some burial areas, but also mountains. But a lot of things were preserved very, very well. So these burials were simple, shallow pits, and this is our priest that we found. And again, many of these were looted for the gold, as we saw in Egypt, and some really beautiful, complex pieces. This is a peanut necklace. The peanut, jicama, and not the potato. I think it's the yam. But there's like three things that were foods from the New World, and peanuts were one of them. So this peanut necklace was highly prized, right? The peanut is an important emblem. So this is another piece that was found in the royal tomb of Saipan.